I'm Zonile Ngubeni and you're watching Joburg Today.
The Constitutional Court has spoken. The local government elections will not be extended to next year. The question is, will these elections be free and fair? And most importantly, will they be safe in the midst of COVID-19? I spoke to the Executive Chairman of the Institute for Election Management Services in Africa, Terry Tselane. I'm Peter Ndoro, and this is For the Record. Terry, always good to talk to you. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Let's begin with the Constitutional Court decision. There's different interpretations of what it means, particularly when it comes to candidates' lists being reopened, the time frame being kept to the original. Let's start with the time frame that the court said, no, you cannot extend this date to next year.
Yes, as you may recall that the Electoral Commission had approached a Constitutional Court with the intention of getting a postponement for the elections to next year. This was following the inquiry that was headed by former Deputy Chief Justice Msaneke. So when that report was presented to the Electoral Commission, they took that report and went to the Constitutional Court to request the Constitutional Court on the basis of that report to postpone the elections.
All right. So were you surprised by that decision, or based on what you heard, is that the only decision that the court really could have come to?
I always believe that the likelihood of the Electoral Commission persuading the Constitutional Court to postpone the election, it did not exist. So I was very clear that based on the papers, the process that they followed and the law, that the Constitutional Court was unlikely to postpone the elections.
All right, so that's the election time frame. Then there's the other issue now about reopening the registration of candidates. The Constitutional Court didn't specifically say that the IEC would be allowed to do that. Your interpretation of that?
Yeah, my interpretation is this, and I think this is quite critical. The Electoral Commission can amend the election timetable in terms of Section 11 of the Municipal Electoral Act. But this is what the Constitutional Court said. They say, notwithstanding the fact that you've got those powers, you must remember that the election timetable that was issued on the 4th of August is still binding and is still applicable. So that is important in terms of the resolution of this debate. Why would the Constitutional Court still insist and inform the IEC that notwithstanding the fact that you have the powers under Section 11, remember that you have to stick still to the election timetable that was issued on the 4th of August. So that order was basically constraining the power that the Commission has under Section 11 of the Municipal Electoral Act. If they were not constraining it, they were not going to say that notwithstanding the fact that we've got the power, and then refer them to the election timetable of the 4th. So then you've got to check what is it that is so sacred that the Constitutional Court would have wanted to preserve in that election timetable which was issued on the 4th. Two things explicitly are taken from that election timetable. First is the proclamation by the minister, and secondly, it is the closing of the voters' roll. So these two things, the Constitutional Court says they've got to be redone. Now, what are you left with in that election timetable of the 4th? You're only left with the candidate nomination process. So what the Constitutional Court is saying is that that process was lawful and valid.
All right, so it'll be interesting to see if there is a court challenge. Quite likely there will be. In the meantime, the IEC has to put on an election, and we've been under the impression that they were going ahead even if they hadn't got the decision. So in theory, they are ready for the election.
In theory, they are. but they are in a very unenvious position. And the reason why they are in this unenvious position, it's largely because their preparations has been interrupted by so many things. Firstly, there were voices, and some of those voices included my own voice, that said that the elections should be postponed because the current conditions do not allow for free and fair elections. They listened to those voices, and then on the basis of that, commissioned an inquiry under Justice Moseneke to establish as to whether indeed the current conditions allow for free and fair elections. Now, Justice Moseneke issued his report and then also agreed with our voices that the current conditions do not allow for free and fair elections. The Electoral Commission, based on that, went to the Constitutional Court, let alone whether it was the right forum or not. But they went there in good faith to try to get the Constitutional Court to postpone. And they were convinced that the Constitutional Court was likely to postpone the elections. And that did not happen. As though that was not enough. Now there is a controversy around whether the candidate nomination process should actually be opened or not. If this matter is taken to court, it is even creating a lot of uncertainty for the preparations of the elections. And I must say that as a person who has managed the elections before, it is a very difficult moment for the Commission. Because firstly, they've not been able to train their staff. I'm not too sure to what extent they've recruited. I'm not too sure as to whether they've been able to get all the facilities that they're using as voting stations. And then how are they going to be able to do this thing within this period of uncertainty? I'm not blaming the Commission for this. I'm saying that there are objective factors out there that militated against them being able to prepare properly for the elections. And I think those will indeed have an impact on the elections.
And I suppose a difficulty for the IEC is it may be seen as if they've gone out of their way to assist a political party, the ANC in particular, to get their candidates in after the failures by the party to get their candidates listed on time.
Absolutely. And then the reason why this is possible for people to come to those kind of conclusions is because they are not able to read, people are not able to read what the law says without having to check who is likely to benefit and or be disadvantaged by such a move. So immediately you bring in the political parties, it basically begins to blind people in terms of really looking at the law and understanding and interpreting it outside the political parties. So if you remove the political parties and you strictly look at the law, then you are able to come to a different conclusion, or to a conclusion that is not contaminated by whether you like a particular political party and whether that political party is going to be advantaged or disadvantaged by the decision.
Do you think that the IEC can deliver safe elections, given that we're in the middle of COVID-19? And as a backdrop to this, Zambia had an election, Uganda had an election, Malawi had an election, even Burundi had an election during COVID-19. So if those countries were able to do the elections, is there an argument that we might not be able to?
No. I think that argument has already been defeated. At the time when this issue was taken to the Constitutional Court and the Constitutional Court ruled that the election should proceed, IEC has got no option but to deliver the elections within a constitutional stipulated period, but also in line with the Constitutional Court judgment or Constitutional Court order. So they have to do that. And do they have the experience of having to run the elections without, creating the election as a super spreader event? Of course they can. In a sense that, remember that not long time ago, the IEC managed the by-elections that they had postponed over a long period of time. So they have developed COVID protocols to manage the elections. And then it is those protocols and the experience they had in the management of the past by-elections that they should use to manage this. I think that is the only way that they can actually be able to ensure safe elections.
I'm in Johannesburg. I'm a voter in Johannesburg, one of the most densely populated parts of the country. Am I going to be safe in my city to cast a vote?
Like I said, it's going to be a difficult one for the Commission, but they're going to have to rely on the experience they have, particularly of having managed the by-elections under COVID. They've got to use that experience, the protocols that they put in place, to also manage in a densely populated area like Johannesburg. In any case, when they had these by-elections, they had quite a number of wards in Johannesburg, including in the townships, which are densely populated, where there were by-elections. So all they've got to do is to put in place the mechanism that they had put in place during that period for these elections.
Technology. I suppose this is something that IAC has been thinking about for a while. Could it be that had the IAC moved quicker, this might have taken away some of the pain this time around?
Indeed. If the IAC had moved faster on introducing electronic voting, it could have alleviated the kind of the crisis that they find themselves in. But again, even there, it was the political parties themselves that did not want the IEC to move into electronic voting. I remember when I was still part of the commission, in 2013, we commissioned a desktop study on electronic voting. 2015, we got all the political parties to come and debate that report that we had commissioned on electronic voting. The African National Congress, the Democratic Alliance, particularly, were not in favor of moving into electronic voting. And I think those reservations from the political parties may have delayed the Electoral Commission in terms of coming up with innovative ways of electronic voting so that, during pandemics like this, it is possible to proceed with voting without any hindrance.
All right, so now that COVID-19 has disrupted everything, do you think there might be a change in thinking by the political parties so that maybe it's too late for these elections, but the general elections that are on the horizon already?
Absolutely. I think there is an opportunity. If you look at all the political parties now, they are doing things virtually. They are having virtual rallies. The Democratic Alliance had Congress virtually. They had elections virtually. So now that they have seen how it actually operates in their space, I think they're likely to support introduction of electronic voting. The African National Congress as well has been relying a lot on technology, and the EFF. So major political parties in South Africa today are supportive of the introduction of electronic mechanism to manage the elections, and I think they are most likely going to support any innovation that leads to that.
All right, perhaps in conclusion, bottom line, it's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult, but an election will happen, and perhaps the only contentious issue is likely that we'll go to court to see whether candidates lists can be reopened or not.
Absolutely, it's going to be a little bit messy. It's not going to be perfect. There are going to be difficulties, but the elections are definitely going to go ahead.
Terry Tselane, Executive Chairman of the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.